We've just got some breaking news in from Buckingham Palace, folks. So this statement has just come in from Buckingham Palace, and I'll read it for you. It goes on to say, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles and...
Buckingham Palace had prepared for a controlled royal announcement, but no one inside the chamber was prepared for the words King Charles was about to speak. With Prince William standing rigidly beside him, and Princess Charlotte unaware of the storm gathering around her name, the monarch issued a proclamation that broke with expectation, unsettled senior royals, and placed a young princess at the center of a historic new royal order, Princess Royal Heiress. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew everyone around the table had arrived, expecting a modest change to ceremonial duties. William believed the meeting would settle future appearances. Catherine expected a discussion about the children. Even Princess Anne assumed the king intended to adjust responsibilities, not rewrite the emotional balance of the family. Then he placed both hands on the proclamation and looked at his eldest son. The title Princess Royal is traditionally associated with the monarch's eldest daughter, a distinction of honor rather than succession. Yet Charles had added one word, heiress. It did not place Charlotte ahead of George, but declared that she would inherit Anne's tradition of service and hold a permanent position beside the direct line to the throne. That difference changed everything. The king read the designation aloud without hesitation. When he finished, he set down his pen and left the second page unsigned. Silence spread across the chamber. William felt pride first, followed by alarm. His daughter had been honored, but her childhood had been tied to expectations she had never accepted. Catherine watched her husband's face harden and understood the same danger. Her first thought was not protocol. It was whether Charlotte knew what had just been decided for her. Anne recognized the wording from recommendations she had delivered to Charles in a private memorandum about the monarchy's future. She had suggested slow preparation, protected service, and no public pressure. The monarch had taken that advice and expanded it into something larger. A confidential training structure was approved. Future patronages had been selected. A ceremonial role had been mapped out under royal authority. Camilla did not move. She did not applaud. The queen consort kept her eyes fixed on a sealed appendix beside the proclamation, and her silence exposed the first fracture. She knew something remained unread, something able to disturb William further, and force Catherine to question how much of Charlotte's future had been arranged without them. But while the palace struggled to understand what Charlotte had just gained, the people closest to her were already calculating what the proclamation might force her to lose. The proclamation carried Charlotte's name, but its emotional weight fell across 4 generations. Charles saw continuity. William saw responsibility. Catherine saw danger. Anne saw the return of a burden she had carried without complaint for decades. And at the center of them all stood a young princess, whose calm public confidence concealed a far more personal reality. Everyone had begun discussing her future before anyone had asked how she felt about it. William entered Charlotte's private sitting room with Catherine beside him, and no aides following behind. The silence between them was heavier than anything said inside the palace chamber. Their daughter looked from one parent to the other, searching their faces before asking the question neither had prepared to answer. Why had everyone become so quiet when Charles spoke her name? The prince sat across from her and explained that Princess Royal Heiress was an honor intended to prepare her for future service. The title connected her to Anne's legacy, meaning the long tradition of public duty carried by the monarch's eldest daughter, but it did not place her ahead of George in the line of succession. Charlotte listened carefully. Then she noticed that her father called it an honor, but never called it a choice. Catherine moved closer and took her daughter's hand. She promised that no proclamation, title, or palace plan would be allowed to take away who Charlotte truly was. Yet the young princess heard the strain behind those words. Her mother wanted to protect her, but protection had suddenly become harder, because the decision carried the king's authority. Charlotte already understood what public attention could do. As George's sister and Louis's protective older sibling, she had learned to remain composed when cameras watched every reaction. During a documented private conversation with Anne months earlier, she had admitted that she wanted to serve the family without becoming a symbol everyone argues over. That sentence now returned with painful force. Anne watched the young princess absorb the news and felt an old sadness rise inside her. The Princess Royal had built her life around relentless duty, yet she remembered the years when composure stopped her from admitting fear. She recognized that same instinct in Charlotte, and knew silence could easily be mistaken for acceptance. Charles believed he had seen something deeper. For years, the monarch had watched his granddaughter steady George during tense occasions, comfort Louis when attention became overwhelming, and remain calm when adults around her lost control. To him, her emotional intelligence made the proclamation necessary. Camilla saw a different future. The Queen Consort feared that Charlotte's growing authority would draw public affection even closer to William's family, and weaken her influence over the next reign. Anne finally confronted Charles in private, and asked whether he had told William about the incident that triggered everything. The king refused to answer. To understand why Charles moved so suddenly, the family would have to return to one ceremony, one unexpected act of courage. And the moment the king decided Charlotte could no longer remain merely in the background. Months before the proclamation, a royal ceremony had nearly collapsed in front of hundreds of guests. A frightened young attendant froze, a senior courtier lost control of the order of events, and palace staff waited for an adult royal to intervene. Instead, Charlotte stepped forward. What she did lasted less than a minute, but Charles never forgot it. Behind closed doors, that single act became the trigger for a decision that would eventually divide the palace. Charles had gathered the family at Windsor Castle for a Commonwealth Youth Investiture, a formal ceremony where young people from across member nations received honors for public service. Camilla sat near the king, while William, Catherine, George, Charlotte, and Anne watched from their assigned places. The young princess had no official duty. Her mother had told her to observe, remain calm, and let the program unfold around her. Then, everything broke. A 12-year-old award recipient stopped halfway across the room. The child had forgotten the rehearsed protocol, the agreed order of movements and words expected during the presentation, and panic took over. Tears came quickly. The presiding courtier tried to continue the ceremony, but that decision left the frightened girl standing alone before hundreds of people. Charlotte moved before anyone could stop her. She left Catherine's side, crossed the distance, and spoke softly enough to steady the child without deepening her embarrassment. "We can walk together," she said. The princess then accompanied her toward Charles, slowing the ceremony and restoring order through kindness rather than command. Catherine felt pride strike first. Dread followed almost immediately. She knew every natural act of compassion from her daughter could become evidence used by the palace to demand more. William understood the same danger. George watched his sister return to her place and realized that the entire room had changed because of her. The prince confronted Charles after the ceremony in a recorded private conversation preserved in the household archive. He insisted that Charlotte had acted as a compassionate sister, not as a future institution. The king answered that the finest royal duty often begins before anyone gives an order. Neither man raised his voice, but the disagreement had already taken root. Charles then asked Anne to prepare a confidential assessment of Charlotte's future. The Princess Royal recommended gradual training, strict privacy, and firm protection for George's position. Yet a second memorandum from the monarch's constitutional advisors added a phrase no one had used before: Princess Royal Heiress. Camilla learned of that proposal before William. During a documented private meeting with the king, the Queen Consort warned that the new designation could create a rival center of loyalty inside the future king's own family. Charles listened, but he did not withdraw it. The monarch later sat alone with a handwritten note Charlotte had given the frightened recipient after the ceremony. He read it twice before approving the proclamation and whispered, "Kindness must be given authority, not merely applause." William eventually discovered that Camilla had met Charles on the night the final language changed. From that moment, he believed something had been hidden. That suspicion would bring William to the king's private chamber, where father and son would finally confront the question no proclamation could conceal. Had Charlotte been honored, or placed inside a struggle for the future crown? William did not challenge his father before courtiers, advisors, or cameras. He waited until the corridor outside the king's private chamber was empty, entered without an aide, and closed the door himself. On the table between them lay the proclamation that had elevated Charlotte's future. But the argument that followed was not about a title. It was about childhood, control, and whether a monarch could command the life of his granddaughter without first asking her father. The prince had demanded an immediate private audience after discovering that palace officials had spent months shaping Charlotte's future program without his direct approval. Charles viewed that preparation as part of his duty as sovereign, meaning his responsibility to protect the monarchy's stability and prepare future working royals before a crisis made careful planning impossible. William placed the training schedule on the desk. "At what point were you going to tell us her life had already been planned?" he asked. The king remained seated and met his son's stare. "At the point when I knew the plan could protect her." The answer made everything worse. William accused Charles of repeating the monarchy's oldest mistake, turning a young person into a public solution before understanding the private cost. The future king said Charlotte had shown kindness, not consent. He warned that praise could become pressure, and pressure could become a prison, long before anyone admitted damage had been done. Charles felt the accusation land like betrayal. He insisted his granddaughter was not being sacrificed but recognized. The monarch argued that refusing to prepare her would leave her exposed when greater duties arrived. To him, structure meant protection. To William, it looked like control disguised as care. The prince then demanded to know why heiress had been added. Charles explained that the word did not refer to the throne. It linked Charlotte to Anne's legacy of national service, disciplined independence, and authority beyond ceremonial appearances. Yet the king then revealed something even more serious. Once she reached adulthood, the proclamation would grant her an advisory seat within the sovereign's family council, the private group that helps shape major royal decisions. William's expression changed. The title was not symbolic. It carried real influence. The prince asked whether Camilla had approved the language. Charles admitted the queen consort had warned that it could unsettle George's position, but insisted she had not created the designation. He then lifted the unsigned appendix, and his hand trembled slightly. William noticed. He did not soften. The document contained obligations Charlotte had never seen. The future king refused to endorse it until his daughter was personally consulted, and Catherine received the power to slow or suspend every stage of preparation. Charles accepted the first condition, but rejected the second, arguing that royal duty could not be controlled by one parent alone. Outside the chamber, Anne waited with a second document. It proved someone had tried to expand Charlotte's role even further. The argument had exposed the family's fear, but the unsigned appendix would reveal something more dangerous: the hidden machinery trying to turn Charlotte's honor into a permanent source of royal power. The proclamation carried Charles's signature, but it had passed through many hands before reaching the royal table. Advisors had revised it, courtiers had debated it, Camilla had questioned it, Anne had tried to limit it, and buried inside the final appendix was a clause William had never approved, one that could allow the palace, rather than Charlotte's parents, to decide when her private preparation became a public obligation. Anne led William into a small library and locked the door behind them. She unfolded an earlier draft of the appendix, a supporting document that explained how the proclamation would work in practice, and pointed to one sentence. It allowed the sovereign's private office to accelerate Charlotte's duties during a period of institutional need. The words looked harmless. They were not. Charles saw the clause as emergency protection for the crown. Palace advisors wanted a dependable future royal workforce, especially during illness, absence, or national crisis. The king feared leaving the monarchy unprepared. William feared the opposite, that preparation would become an excuse to take control of his daughter's life. The prince also knew George remained the direct heir after him. Charlotte had not replaced her brother in the line of succession, meaning the legal order determining who would inherit the throne. Yet her new designation created a separate channel of authority, one that could never be fully absorbed into George's future role. Anne admitted she had felt physically cold when she first read the clause. The Princess Royal remembered how easily words like necessity and duty could erase a young person's right to refuse. William felt betrayed that she had known about the planning, even though she had opposed its harshest terms. The future king challenged her directly. Anne accepted his anger and explained, through a documented private account, that she remained involved because walking away would have left the advisors without resistance. She had already persuaded Charles to remove another line, ordering Charlotte's first independent duty within 12 months. Without that intervention, the young princess would have been pushed forward almost immediately. Catherine reacted with even greater alarm when William showed her the draft. The princess saw the emergency clause as a door the institution could open whenever fear took control. Camilla had not written it, but she supported preserving palace discretion. In a recorded consultation, the Queen Consort argued that Charlotte's popularity could become strategically important during a future crisis. William refused to accept that logic. The prince used his authority as heir and demanded a safeguard: no expansion of Charlotte's duties before adulthood without written consent from both parents and the young princess herself. Charles resisted, then looked again at the clause. The king picked up the appendix, drew a line through the disputed sentence, and signed his initials beside the deletion. William had won protection, but he had not stopped the proclamation. Then the sealed order was circulated through the royal household. Precedents changed. Security plans shifted. Staffing decisions followed. With one clause removed and the proclamation still intact, Charlotte's title began reshaping palace life at once, and the first person to feel that change would not be the young princess herself. Royal power rarely announces its consequences with shouting. Sometimes it arrives as a chair moved closer to the monarch, a briefing folder placed before a new name, or a courtier suddenly changing the order in which family members enter a room. Within hours of Charles's proclamation, those small adjustments began appearing throughout the palace. Each one confirmed that Charlotte's future had changed, and each one forced the adults around her to confront what the new order meant for them. Charles had already approved revised household instructions, recognizing Charlotte as the future inheritor of Anne's senior service role. Long-term preparation status meant that palace teams could begin planning her education, security, ceremonial training, and charitable work years before she assumed any public duty. William and Catherine were named as the final family gatekeepers, yet the machinery had already started moving. An aide entered the first family briefing and shifted Charlotte's chair closer to the king. A slim embossed folder was placed before her. She stared at it for a moment, then pushed it toward William. "I do not want to open it alone," she said. The prince felt pride and guilt strike at once. He placed his hand over the folder and promised that nothing inside could command her without a family conversation. Catherine watched her daughter breathe more steadily, but the princess understood that fear had already entered the room. George felt it too. The young heir asked Charlotte privately whether the palace was trying to create competition between them. She told her brother she did not want his future, but she would not apologize for being trusted with her own. George accepted the answer, though the tension remained. Their bond had survived the proclamation, but innocence had not. Camilla experienced the change more sharply. During the briefing, the Queen Consort tried to redirect a discussion about future patronages, meaning official causes supported by members of the royal family. A constitutional advisor answered Charlotte's question first, and only then acknowledged her interruption. The slight was quiet, but she understood it immediately. The Queen returned to her private sitting room, removed her gloves, and placed them on the table with unusual force. In a recorded conversation with a trusted aide, Camilla admitted that the palace was preparing for a future in which her guidance mattered less. She had not lost her title, but she could feel influence moving away from her. Catherine then learned that public interest in Charlotte's charitable future had surged, even though no detailed program had been released. Charles responded by directing her preparation toward children's welfare, military families, education, and national unity, the same areas that had shaped Anne's reputation for practical service. The king also appointed Anne as Charlotte's long-term mentor. The Princess Royal accepted, knowing the role carried both honor and danger. Yet Charlotte did not feel relieved. That evening, she asked to speak with Anne alone. The palace had debated Charlotte's authority without hearing her voice. But behind a closed door with Anne, the young princess was finally ready to decide what the title would mean on her own terms. There were no advisors in the room, no proclamation on the table, and no monarch directing the conversation. There was only Anne, Charlotte, and the question everyone else had avoided. Did the young princess actually want the future they had built around her? Charlotte's answer was neither frightened nor obedient. She would accept the honor, but only after setting a boundary that no courtier, sovereign, or future crisis would be permitted to cross. Anne met Charlotte alone, in a private room at Windsor, and made certain no aide remained nearby. The Princess Royal wanted the conversation stripped of ceremony, pressure, and palace expectation. She explained that royal titles could give a person purpose, but they could also become cages when duty was used to silence fear, doubt, or exhaustion. Charlotte listened, then asked the question that changed everything. Were you ever afraid to disappoint the monarch? Anne looked down at her hands before answering. Through a documented private account later preserved for the family archive, she admitted that fear had shaped far more of her early life than the public ever knew. The older princess had learned to appear strong before she understood how to say she was overwhelmed. Duty gave her direction, but silence often demanded the price. Charlotte said she wanted to help people. She wanted to serve beside George and support the family. But she did not want every compassionate act turned into proof that she was ready to surrender her childhood. The young princess feared that one kind moment had become permission for the palace to plan decades of her life. Anne felt the guilt immediately. Her own recommendations had helped inspire the proclamation, even though she had tried to protect Charlotte from its harshest demands. She warned that admiration could become dangerous when adults used it to ask for more than a child had freely offered. Then Charlotte made her choice. She would accept the designation, but her preparation had to remain private, gradual, and voluntary until adulthood. George could never be presented as her rival. The young heir's future reign had to be strengthened by her service, not challenged by a second court built around her name. Charlotte also proposed that her first future initiative should support young people facing intense public or family pressure. She wanted the title to protect others from the same fear now surrounding her. Anne opened a small velvet case and removed a royal insignia, a symbolic badge representing official service to the crown. The Princess Royal did not pin it onto Charlotte. She placed it in her hand and told her she alone would decide when she was ready to wear it. Charlotte closed her fingers around it. "Then I will carry it, but I will not let it carry me." Anne understood that the young princess had done what the adults could not. She had defined the title without being consumed by it. Charles accepted her conditions and prepared a clarified proclamation. But outside Windsor, the original announcement had already become a national storm. Charlotte had reclaimed the meaning of her future inside Windsor. But beyond the gates, the nation was already turning her name into a symbol of something far larger. By sunrise, the proclamation was no longer a private royal decision. It had become a national event. Commentators debated its constitutional meaning. Families argued over whether Charlotte had been honored or burdened, and crowds gathered beneath palace balconies, hoping to witness a new chapter in royal history. Yet one single image captured the public mood more powerfully than any formal analysis. A young girl holding a handmade sign outside Windsor Castle. News outlets described the announcement as the most significant new royal designation created during Charles's reign. A royal designation is an official title defining a person's place and future responsibilities within the monarchy. Broadcasters repeatedly stressed that George remained directly behind William in the line of succession, while Charlotte's new position created a separate path of service rather than a claim to her brother's future throne. The country divided almost immediately. Some families saw the proclamation as recognition of Charlotte's discipline and compassion. Others feared the palace had placed adult expectations upon a child before she could understand their weight. Outside Windsor Castle, those two emotions met behind the barriers. A young girl raised a handwritten sign above the crowd. "Let Charlotte choose how she serves." Cameras captured it, broadcasters repeated it, and within hours, the message became the emotional symbol of the day. One newspaper placed Charlotte beside Anne, beneath the headline, "The Crown's New Daughter of Duty." Another answered with a sharper question, "Honor or burden?" Catherine watched the televised report beside William and became visibly emotional. The princess had struggled to explain her fear without appearing to reject her daughter's honor. Now the Windsor sign expressed what she could not say publicly. The nation was not asking the young royal to refuse duty. It was asking the palace to protect her freedom. Charles watched the same coverage with growing frustration. The king believed he had recognized courage, not created pressure. Yet as the reports continued, he understood something deeper. The public was not rejecting Charlotte's future service. It was demanding that her consent remain at the center of it. William moved quickly. The prince approved a formal clarification, stating that the designation created no immediate public schedule, and that Charlotte's education, privacy, and personal development would remain the family's priority. Anne then broke her silence through a recorded palace statement, calling the young princess a future servant of the nation, not a possession of the institution. Camilla heard the words and made her decision. The queen consort would not oppose the revised terms. Further resistance would isolate her from Charles, William, Anne, and a public now fiercely protective of Charlotte. The king signed the amended proclamation before William, Catherine, Anne, and his granddaughter. Then he passed the pen toward Charlotte, not to request her signature, but to show that the final word belonged to her future self. The world had delivered its judgment, but the true verdict would come inside the family. From the king who created the title and the young princess who taught him how it must be carried. The proclamation began as an act of royal power, but it ended as something Charles had not anticipated, a lesson in the limits of that power. Charlotte remained Princess Royal Heiress, yet the title no longer represented a future imposed upon her. Through William's resistance, Catherine's protection, Anne's honesty, and Charlotte's own quiet courage, the palace transformed a command into a promise that duty could be inherited without surrendering freedom, identity, or childhood. Charles asked Charlotte to meet him privately in the same chamber where the original announcement had changed everything. The disputed appendix was gone. Only the amended proclamation remained on the table. That document now confirmed her as the future inheritor of Anne's tradition of service, while protecting George's place in the direct succession, the legal order deciding who will inherit the throne. The king looked at his granddaughter and admitted what pride had prevented him from seeing. He had recognized her strength, but he had failed to understand how that recognition might feel when delivered without warning. A sovereign could name a duty, he told her, but no monarch could command the heart needed to fulfill it. Charlotte listened without interruption. Then the princess answered with a calmness that carried more authority than the original proclamation. She was proud to follow Anne, but she wanted to earn the title slowly. No independent program would begin before adulthood, and any future expansion would require her informed consent, along with the support of William and Catherine. William understood that Charles had never intended to exploit his daughter. Still, the prince did not regret confronting him. His resistance had become the safeguard, preventing the monarchy from repeating its oldest mistake, demanding sacrifice before asking permission. Catherine embraced Charlotte after the meeting and felt the fear inside her finally ease. The princess realized the institution had not taken her daughter away. Instead, the young royal had begun learning how to stand within it without disappearing. Anne accepted the responsibility of guiding Charlotte, but the Princess Royal promised to teach more than obedience. She would protect her honesty, humor, stamina, and independence, because service without identity was not strength, it was surrender. Camilla also accepted the new reality. At the final family gathering, the queen consort withdrew her objections and acknowledged Charlotte's place. She understood that the next generation would not be shaped by influence alone. Charles then opened a small case and offered Charlotte the royal insignia, a symbolic badge representing official service to the crown. The monarch did not place it upon her. She chose to keep it inside the case until the day she believed she had earned the right to wear it. The proclamation had not created a rival to George or a replacement for Anne. It created a new model of duty, built on consent, protection, and character. Charlotte became the Princess Royal Heiress because she proved strong enough to tell the palace where its authority must end. And when the chamber doors finally opened, Charlotte walked out beside her family, not as a child trapped beneath a title, but as a princess who had claimed the right to define it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.